Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Business Talk Library. And today I have another great guest on. And, I came across Stuart's profile because I was looking at the Charlotte Podcast Festival and I saw that he was one of the speakers on the lineup. So I'm always interested in learning from others who are, I guess you say thought leaders or thought speakers in the space. And then also, he has recently released a new book that came out last week that will definitely talk about his new book as well. So welcome to the show, Stuart.
Thank you so very much, Terrell. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now, before you became an author and a speaker, what was your background before all that?
I worked in local TV news for 32 years. I was an investigative reporter, and I worked half of that time at the NBC station in Charlotte, WCNC. But I also worked at WRAL, Big Five over in Raleigh, which you know from your time in Fayetteville. That's the TV station for Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Fayetteville. Fayetteville's bigger than Chapel Hill. It's a big part of that market. So more than half my career in the Carolinas. Two of my four kids were born here. Three of my four kids are Tar Heels, and all four kids graduated from Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. So we have more Carolina connections than we do to my home state of Georgia.
Wow, wow. So now was, working in the news and that business, was that always kind of the aim that you were after, or did that kind of just, I guess brilliance of opportunity open up for you?
Well, you're a numbers guy, and we've talked. I am not a numbers guy. I was an English major. I like talking. I enjoy talking, and so more important than the journalism was the talking. I tell people I spent 32 years putting groceries on the table by talking, and if you can run your mouth that long and have somebody pay you for it, then that's just ideal to me. So I was an English major at the unknown SEC school. We make the top half of the SEC possible there at Vanderbilt. I was a Commodore, and we tried to be Harvard 5 days a week and Alabama on Saturday, and it didn't work out well either way. But I finally graduated. I crammed 4 years into 6 there, and finally walked across that stage and got a real live diploma, not just an empty piece of paper. And I decided, well, what can you do with a BA in English? And you can do everything or you can do nothing with a BA in English. It doesn't exactly qualify you to go directly into some line of work. It's not like accounting, Terrell. It's not like accounting. And so journalism and TV news always seem to be like a front line of history. And you can either be a voyeur, you can either be a rubbernecker just trying to see what kind of accidents there have been on the highway, what kind of crime tape, what kind of flashing blue lights are out there, or you can eventually try to promote change. You can try to be a pot stirrer, for lack of a better word. You can try to kind of stir things up, or what we used to say is hold the powerful accountable. Give voice to the voiceless and hold the powerful accountable. And I think in a small way, now we'll talk about the podcast, I do give voice to the voiceless doing that. And in a small way, I still do that. I still call it journalism.
Okay, awesome. Now, so as an investigative reporter, I mean, when I hear the term used a lot, because of course I was not a journalism major nor spent much time in that area. I spent more of my time in the business around the math and the accounting. So when you say investigative reporter, is there a particular niche that you aim for, or it's just whatever cases or I guess you say stories came up, you were there to investigate?
Well, the best stories come when people pick up the phone and say, hey, you really ought to look into this.
Okay.
That's where absolutely the best stories come from, or from being curious yourself. I've been a curious person myself. So there's not one particular beat, if you will, that I worked on. I worked on a wide variety of stories. A lot of them surrounded government. So if you say hold the powerful accountable, who has the power? Well, people with all the money in business, or people with the political power in Washington or in the state capitol in Raleigh or in the state capitals across the country. So it could be politically powerful people. It could be people who are powerful because they built up a grassroots base, but it usually means money and political power. It usually means confronting people who have a whole lot of money. And that could be any number of people. When I was in Raleigh, we won a whole bunch of the national awards by doing a really in-depth investigation into the military healthcare system, specifically into malpractice on the part of military physicians. We did it in conjunction at WREL with the Dayton Daily News and the Cox News Service in Dayton, Ohio. They won the Pulitzer Prize, and we won the Peabody and the DuPont, which are like the Pulitzer Prize for television. That had never really happened before that I've heard of. And so that's the kind of story that I was best known for. But I've also looked at a whole bunch of other institutions, including, state lawmakers, and then also the broadcasters themselves, which got uncomfortable. So I hit a little bit too close to home there, Terrell, a little too close to home.
I mean, that does sound like a very interesting subject matter to investigate. Is when you're, I guess I would look at it like, in the business world, I would compare it to almost like a whistleblower where there are rules that protect them. But I guess as a journalist, I'm not sure if those same protections are there for you.
They are not, I can assure you. They can fire you at will, and they did. And we could talk about that if you want to too, but that led to my wonderful career now and my wonderful second life as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that. I mean, just the transition to the second life. You mean, as an entrepreneur, what was it kind of the thing that sparked it for you, or did it just feel like, hey, this seemed like the next natural step?
Well, the long story short was, after 32 years in the business, some of the top awards, 10 Emmys, 3 Peabodys, I did a fellowship at Harvard that was completely paid for by the Nieman Foundation for Journalism. They fired me. And so I had a choice at that point. I could kind of tuck my tail between my legs, move on down the road and keep on keeping on doing the same thing. Or what I did was take a real beat. I took a real moment and took a hard look and said, what is sort of the business model of local TV news? And what is the professional landscape of local TV news? And do I want to keep on doing the exact same thing, just in a different city? Or do I want to go and create something all on my own, completely new, where the field is wide open? As they say in football, the running field is wide open. You're looking at open field. There's no defender in sight. And I decided that sounded pretty good, compared to doing the same old that I had done. And so I made a radical break. I sued them. We settled. I sued them for wrongful termination and age discrimination. I got a little tiny bit of money out of that, not enough to really live on for very long. But I'll tell you the truth. They're not anxious to hire you after you sue them. They are not really anxious to hire you at the next TV station after they learn that you sued them. And I learned after the fact that I really did that to make a clean break, to blow up the bridges, to set fire to the ships, and to look forward into a new way of doing things.
Wow. That is quite the change, because you usually don't hear a lot of, entrepreneurs say, what, pretty much, what I hear them say is, I figured, hey, I can go try this, and if it doesn't work, I can always go back. In your case, you literally did set the ships on fire, and blew up the bridge. So it's just like, hey, this next thing, I got to make it work. So,
right.
So right. What was that, what has that journey been like? I mean, with, I guess you say, the additional pressure of knowing that, hey, you got to make it work.
Well, because of where I was in life, I was age 55. And what usually you'll hear people do is they'll just kind of keep on keeping on, trying to eke it out until 62, 65. Then they'll cobble together the 401k, the Social Security, whatever, and they'll try to go out there and go fishing or play golf or hang out with the grandkids. What I did was make a commitment to myself that I will never retire. And I don't think if I earn millions of dollars, which please hope I do, I still don't think I'd retire because I love what I'm doing so very much and because I have stories to tell. And what I am, whether I'm in local TV news, whether I'm on a podcast, whether I'm on a book, whether I'm behind a microphone speaking, I'm a storyteller. It comes in my DNA, it comes in my blood, it comes in my culture. You know, growing up in South Georgia, people stood around and they told one hell of a story, and you couldn't get away from them. You know, and so I inherited some of that. It's really in my blood. And so I determined that I was going to keep going and telling stories. And unlike some of those stories I heard as a boy, when you're in journalism, the stories you tell, you got to have like pieces of paper and documentation. The stories I tell are true. You know, not only are they entertaining, they have to be true. I have to be able to show you a document or a piece of paper or some kind of verification that this actually happened. And so what I did was for 5 years, I wandered around the country at my expense, depleting all my retirement assets to gather stories. And only in the last year have I released those stories to the world. I've begun releasing them one by one in the form of podcast, book, and now it's going to be speaking, documentary film, etc. And so the whole idea was to get into media, telling those stories in each and every medium I could, one by one.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about your podcast. So what's the name of the podcast and what can people expect when they listen to it?
The name of the podcast is Man Listening, and it's one word. There are no hyphens or spaces, Man Listening. And so no matter what social media you go on or manlistening.com or LinkedIn, wherever, if you look for Man Listening, one word, and Man Listening is the opposite of mansplaining, in which I only talk to women. I talk to them one-on-one, face-to-face, even if we're wearing masks or at a distance. It's not over the Zoom or the Skype or the satellite or whatever. We talk face-to-face, and it's based on me trying to learn to listen, not argue, not interrupt, you know, not explain or mansplain, but to just try to listen and understand. That's what it's all about.
Gotcha. Now, how did the vision of that come into play? Like, you know, what made you decide on that being, you know, your beat?
Well, I have, as I was telling you, I have a biological mother. I have a birth mother who put me up for adoption and a mom. So I had two mothers. I had two sisters, one biological and one adopted. I have a wife of almost 40 years, and then I have three daughters and only one son. So I am surrounded for 3 generations by women, and I was not listening to them. They were trying to help me out. And I didn't want to hear it. I was like, tell it to the hand, you know? And so I really was, it's polite to say middle-aged. I was an old, you know, gray-haired man when I needed to learn a new skill. And that was to actually understand my wife when we became empty nesters, to understand my daughters when they were trying to say, Dad, that's not cool. Like if I said certain things, they would say, not cool. You know, it's not good. The way you're talking is not good. And I could either double down and be hard-headed and say, well, I'm the father, I'm the daddy, I'm the papa, you know, or I could say, you know what? Maybe I can learn from these daughters of mine. Maybe I can learn from this wife of almost 40 years. Maybe I can learn from my sisters, my mothers, you know, maybe it's in my best interest to begin to learn to listen to these women. And sure enough, it has been a revelation, Terrell. It has been a revelation.
Wow. That is amazing. So, I mean, with your podcast, how often are episodes released? And I guess, you know, how do you find your guests?
Well, it's released like clockwork. That's one of the key things that I learned. It's a regular cadence that people can absolutely rely on a new podcast, a fresh podcast, every Thursday morning at 3:30 a.m. Now, I don't think anybody's waiting up to get it, but if you subscribe to Man Listening, wherever you get your podcast, could be Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever, Google Play, on Thursday morning, boom, you're way in. If you want to jump in the car, or if you need to do some work in the yard or whatever you're doing where you listen to podcasts, it'll be there. It's brand fresh new. And so we're almost a year in. We're 11 months into that. We started in January and we're more than 45 episodes in. And we've never missed a date. We've never missed a deadline. And the guests are not celebrities. And I've really been torn about that because it's a lot easier if you have celebrities. You know, if I had Oprah on my podcast, if I had Beyonce on my podcast, you know, if I had Michelle Obama, that'd be wonderful. You know, it'd be great for the ratings. If I had Taylor Swift, Reese Witherspoon, you know, if I can go on and on. I have not really gone that way. Rather, I have talked to people have started to try to say, oh, you talk to ordinary women or you talk to regular or normal. I said, listen, they're not ordinary, they're not regular, and they're not normal. You know, what they are is real. They're 100%. They keep it 100, real. They're absolutely real. And because we sit down and talk, and because I ask, I don't do any research. I tell them I'm the Larry King of podcasting. And somebody told me, Larry King, one time, they said, Larry, your secret is you're dumb. You're dumb. That's your success. Well, if you read and read and read and read and research, then you get a certain idea of what everybody else said this person was. But if you never read or do all that background, then what you are is seeing someone fresh for the first time. You're not encountering any of the prejudice of all that baggage in the past. And what that means is you're not asking the same old questions. So when you ask new open-ended questions, surprise, you get new and fresh answers. So someday I hope I do talk to Michelle Obama or Beyonce or Oprah or Taylor Swift or Reese Witherspoon. You know, I hope I do get to talk to them, but I hope I talk to them in a little bit of a different way than the countless interviews I've done in the past, in which it's just regurgitating the same old mush, you know.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so now this brings us to, you know, you just released a new book the last week. And I love the, you know, the subheading or title that's on the front of the book. So tell us a little bit about the book.
Okay. The book is called What She Said and What I Heard, How One Man Shut Up and Started Listening. And so it goes with the theme. You can see how it dovetails into the theme of the podcast. But a lot of times people just put out verbatims, you know, transcripts of people who've been on the podcast. This is not that at all. What it is it tells my own life story through the women who were most impactful in my life. And sometimes that impact was just in an instant. It was just, you know, something that was spontaneous that was said to me. Sometimes it was my birth mother, my mom, the women who were the child caregivers when I was being raised in South Georgia, my sisters, you know, on and on. You know, occasionally it was a woman at work who was a producer and I said something incredibly crude and she just turned around and slapped the fire out of me. You know,
Wow.
Well, she just turned around and smacked me. She didn't have to say anything. And back in those days, in the real old days, 30, 35 years ago, there were no HR reports. There were no police reports. There were no lawsuits filed. There were no press conferences. I just said what I said. She turned around and slapped me. And then in that chapter, I turn around and 25, 30 years later, my daughter, my youngest daughter, is a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And we're riding in the car on Franklin Street, the famous Franklin Street. And there are three boys walking up the street. And one of them said something and the other ones laughed. And she turned around and flipped them off with both hands, you know, and I was like, what? What's going on? And she said, never mind, Dad. And I said, what? What did they say? What did they say? You know, I want to get up there. What did they say? What did they say to you? Don't make me stop this car, you know. And she said, Dad, just drive. Just don't worry about it. And I suddenly realized, you know, the tables had turned and my daughter was just like that young producer. And I was just like those boys, you know, only now I'm the father. So I see those kind of, misogynist comments, those kind of crude comments. I see them in a completely different light, because now, as they say, ain't no fun when the rabbit gets the gun. Now I have 3 daughters, and my daughter could have been that young producer in that newsroom. And so it's those kinds of stories. I don't come out looking good, Terrell, in a lot of this book. It's not hero worship about me. It's all the mistakes I made in being a bonehead and not listening to women when I really should have.
Wow. Wow. It's always very, I say, very, very humbling to see, someone that can be honest about their own mistakes. Because one of the things that mentors have definitely told me is like, you could either learn from making mistakes yourself and going through the hard lessons, or you can really pay attention to the mistakes of others,
right,
and learn so you don't have to go that route. So I'm always grateful for people who, are, secure enough to lay out their mistakes so that other people can learn from them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. It'd be nice if I learned without having to make all those mistakes, but it seems a waste to me to have the mistake, get the lesson, and then not share it just because I'm so prideful that I want to look good, like I came fully formed into this, sensitive new age dad. I did not. I was dragged kicking and screaming by 3 very strong and very bright young women who just happened to be my daughters. And a lot of other women too that I worked with, contemporaries, peers, etc.
And you mentioned that you do have a son as well, right?
Yes.
So I'm
Yeah,
sure that he's learning a lot from seeing all this.
he's a better man than I am. He's a better man than I am by virtue of having those sisters and having a great mom. And, I had a great mom too, but he has 3 sisters and I only had 1 growing up, and he's learned a lot from them. And he's the baby too. They're all older sisters. So he didn't stand much of a chance. So right in kindergarten, when the other boys were running around the room, Jack was sitting there. Gentleman Jack with folded hands was sitting there just watching. And so the little girls loved Jack because he wasn't running around like a crazy man pushing things over. He was always very calm. He was always, by disposition, Terrell, he was always a very calm young man.
Awesome. So where can people find a copy of the book?
You can find it wherever you find books. And so if you're an independent bookstore, if you're in Charlotte and you go to Park Road Books, or if you're in Asheville and you go to your Malaprops or the bookstore there, you can go there, you can go to Amazon, you can go on Kindle, you can go on Apple, wherever you want to get a book or an ebook. And then next month in December, in time for Christmas, it'll come out as an audiobook with yours truly, narrating my own story. So I'm reading my own words. It didn't make any sense to me for me to pay a narrator to read the stuff that I wrote when I'm the guy who knows how to read it anyway. So I'm not going to hire an actor. For 32 years, I was in broadcasting. So I think I'm capable of reading my own writing. And so I have a really good friend here in town, Joe Kuhlman, went into his home studio. He tweaked the audio. We took 2 or 3 days, got it all down right. And it's very professionally done. And it'll be uploaded, whether it's Audible or whether it's any of the other ways that you get audiobooks. It'll be available audiobook, available ebook, like your Kindle or your Apple, and then also available in softback right now in the bookstores. So barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, wherever you get books, it'll be available. I didn't want anybody having any excuses. They go, well, do you have it in audiobook? Yeah, I do. Oh, well, I guess I'll have to get it then because they've run out of excuses, Terrell.
Awesome. Well, one question before we wrap up that I like to ask every guest that comes on is, when you think about, where your journey has taken you from and the things that you've done and things you're currently doing, what's one, or I guess what's 2 pieces of advice that you would share with other business owners?
Well, you and I were talking that, to my mind, there are three parts of any endeavor. There's the people who love the creative thing. They make the thing. And that's what I love doing. They're the creators. Whether they're making a widget or an invention or a film or whatever they're making, they're the ones who make the product, right? And then they're the people who sell the product. They're the marketers and the salesmen, and they're out there. They're the front people, right? And then there's a third side, and there are people like yourself, and they deal with QuickBooks and spreadsheets and IRS forms and W-2s and W-9s and, you know, holy cow, that I run away from like crazy. I don't want to deal with it. I don't like seeing the numbers. You know, I have to see the numbers. Otherwise, I'm going to go broke really fast. I have to know what they are, but I do not like them. And so the quickest thing I have to do as an entrepreneur is recognize what is my strength. It's not that I can't do QuickBooks. It's that I would rather do anything. I'll have root canals, I'll have dental surgery rather than do QuickBooks. And so the quickest I identify the things that I do not like to do and call up Terrell and go, hey, I need your help. I need you to do this and keep me up to date. And here's the magic words, I will pay you to do this. And when I pay Terrell to do QuickBooks, which is what his superpower is, that liberates me to go and record conversations and shoot documentary films and sit at the typewriter and type up hundreds of pages and format my book and get out there. It liberates me to go do the other two parts of the triangle, which is the marketing of it. You know, I can come out here and tell you about my book, and then I can also go and write more books or create more content. It liberates me to be able to recognize what it is that I'm really not naturally good at. And so if I spend all my time forcing myself to become an expert in QuickBooks, something that I do not like and am not good at, then I'm wasting the time I could be spending creating the really one-of-a-kind valuable content that only I can do, you know, that only I can create my story. You can't tell my life story, only I can tell my life story. And so it's incumbent on me to do it, to sit down and tell that life story, which is what I've done in the form of memoir and then documentary film, etc. So that's the main thing that I learned, is how quickly can I hire bright people to do the things that I'm ill-equipped for and really don't like to do anyway.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Stuart, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your background, telling us some more about, you know, your podcast, about your book. And we'll definitely include a link so people can, you know, follow your podcast of Man Listening. And then they can also pick up a copy of your book, because I think that there's a lot of value to be learned from someone who's been in the business of, you can say, the news networks and has been around that environment for years. And like you said, you've been surrounded by women in 3 generations. And, you know, now you're learning that lesson and looking back over the mistakes you made and just sharing the wisdom so others don't have to make the same mistakes. So definitely thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Business Talk Library. If you like our content, be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want to see more of our exclusive content, you can subscribe and become a member on patreon.com/Business Talk Library. Hey, the Business Talk Library is the place where business makes sense.